That's brilliant. Thanks very much for that.
Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. Just a couple of final questions from me to Dame Kate. In the lecture that you gave a couple of weeks ago in Oxford, you reflected on your time leading the vaccines task force, which everyone acknowledges was a huge success and an example of how to do things. But you said that it's interesting to reflect that the behaviour of the government appears to have changed significantly from my time in the VTF. And you say, it now appears that the waters have closed over the approach that was taken, which was close working with businesses, and that officials have reverted to their usual practice and the pre-existing culture of distrust of business been lost. Just say why you have formed that concern and what can be done about it.
Well, part of it's informed by Valneva and the idea that here's a small company that is busting a gut to try and support us last year to scale up, build new plants, scale up manufacturing capabilities, develop vaccines for us, and then gets sent a letter from the government alleging breach of delivery, so as not to pay the costs that they've incurred to actually develop the vaccine for us. So for me, that is not a good signal. I have no issue. If the government wants to cancel contracts, they can cancel contracts, but they should pay their debts where they're due. And that we are a small industry, and that sort of behaviour doesn't carry well. And the other example I gave in the Romanes lecture was the plant-based manufacturing. Again, huge opportunity to work with very capable, keen companies that would again establish a very rapid manufacturing capability in the UK. But the decision, again, not by the industry people, but by Whitehall, was no, we have to go through a normal procurement process, which basically is going to take forever and basically means we're not going to operate in that nimble, quick, collaborative way that was so effective last year. So I worry about that, and I worry that the team of experts that we put together to do all the due diligence, whether it's manufacturing, science, regulatory, clinical, I don't think it's been used since I left. So that's the sort of thing which is, again, it's difficult to work in an environment where you don't have people skilled in the areas in which they're working. And you do need people who are scientists, operationally experienced, with links to industry, to actually be able to think about some of these long-term strategic problems and be creative about how you solve them. And I think if we basically don't have the skills and we don't have the industry relationships, and where we do have industry relationships, we don't look after them, I don't think that puts us in a very strong position.
Thank you very much. And a final question to me. In answer to my first question, you described where we are with the virus as entering a period in which it is endemic. Could you just sort of say how you respond to an endemic virus as opposed to the pandemic that we've experienced for most of the period so far? So
it means that the virus is going to circulate, I think, forever. Now, I hope it will circulate in a less virulent form. And it means that we have to basically manage it as we would do with flu, which is also an endemic virus. And so that means we have to identify who's most at risk. We need to continue to protect those people forever. It's, again, you've got Wei Shen coming up, and he will be a lot more thoughtful about than I would. But my expectation is that those most vulnerable should be vaccinated regularly. That may be only yearly now. So that, to me, means all adults over the age of 50 and all adults under 50 with severe underlying disease, and anybody else that JCVI recommends. And they would be given routine vaccinations. And then if, depending on the severity, it may need to go beyond those high-risk groups. But I think initially we're going to have to think about how do we keep those high-risk groups protected forever. Now, some level of viral presence may provide a natural boost, and that itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But we just need to understand what is the actual strain of virus and what's the consequence of it in terms of what the vaccine is going to need to look like and who needs to get them.
Dame Kate, thank you very much indeed for your evidence to us. We're very grateful, as the country is, for your work in leading the Vaccines Task Force. You've been very helpful to the committee throughout our inquiries, and we're very grateful for your evidence today. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
I'm now going to welcome our next witness, who I'm very pleased to introduce, from South Africa, Dr. Angelique Coetzee is joining us. Dr. Coetzee is the chair of the South African Medical Association and was one of the first clinicians in that country to have detected what turned out to be the presence of the Omicron variant. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Coetzee. Perhaps you can just summarise for us, given your experience of, I think, about 5 weeks now in South Africa, summarise how much more transmissible Omicron is compared to the Delta variant. Perhaps starting with that, what have you found on that?
Good morning, and thank you for asking our opinion. If we look at the transmissibility of the Omicron virus, it is most probably equal currently to Delta, and it might be more transmissible than Delta. We would only know as the time progresses and we reach the top of our curve regarding whether it would have been more. But for now, it's definitely on par. And as I've said, it can even be more transmissible at the end of the day.
Thank you very much indeed. Then a similar question in terms of the severity of the disease that is associated with Omicron compared to Delta. What's your experience so far in South Africa?
Thank you. I'm going to answer it in two ways. First of all, regarding primary health care, the predominantly picture that we are seeing here are that of a mild disease. But however, we see a different picture in the hospital admissions, especially around unvaccinated people, of which the majority are unvaccinated. Unfortunately, in our hospital in ICU, we do not have the stats to determine whether it is Omicron versus Delta. We do sequencing around about 1 per 200 patients. So will be done a sequencing. So we only look there at the clinical picture. Again, if we look at the current cases in the ICU, our ICUs are still not overwhelmed by COVID cases. Also, if we report our hospital admissions, it's a mix of people incidentally being found positive with COVID-19, admitted for any other disease except for COVID-19. And then you will have people in ICU that is there predominantly of COVID-19. And our death rates, unfortunately, are also reported as just COVID-19 death rates. Although our death rates are quite low, the numbers. So again, the severity, everyone admitted in ICU is always a severe case. Whether it's Omicron versus Delta, we cannot comment on that.
I see. So reflecting on the pattern of severe disease and hospitalisation from COVID, given that you can't necessarily split them between the two, we're now a few weeks since the first detection of Omicron. What has been the experience in terms of hospitalisations from COVID more generally across South Africa during that time?
If I can give you some of the stats from the 9th of December, our death rate, it was on the 9th was 22 patients, on the 10th was 49 patients, on the 11th 36 patients, on the 13th it was 11 patients yesterday. So we don't have that huge amount of, as we have said, death rates. Currently, we are extremely grateful for that. If we, however, also looked at our cases being positive in the general public, on 9th of December, it was 22,390. On the 10th, it was 19,000. 11th, 17,000. 12th, on the 12th, 18,000. On yesterday, 13,992. Our positivity rate, depends on how many people go and get tested during, a specific day. But it is more or less, yesterday was now a high positivity rate because not a lot of people went for tested. It was 31, but the average is around about 25% on our positivity rate. However, yesterday, the hospital admissions across South Africa was 422 again, and again, as I said earlier, it doesn't, it includes the mix of incidental findings as well as sick people. Then regarding the oxygen needs of patients, we have seen the patients that's been admitted, and it's incidentally all been admitted with, because our public sector system will sometimes, if there's a problem at home and the patient present and it's positive, keeping in mind what we have seen with Delta, you will admit them for, just to observe them. And again, no oxygen needs, and the length of stay for these mild cases are less than half of what was for Delta-related cases. Cytokine storm, we don't really see that at the primary healthcare level. However, again, still early days regarding what's happening at ICU level. So we are quite comfortable that the average patient in primary healthcare that we are examining on a day-to-day basis and that comes into our surgeries, the average person will recover within 5 to maximum 7 days. And we haven't encountered so far long COVID with these specific patients. We're not talking about patients in ICU.
Thank you. And as well as being chair of the South African Medical Association, you're a doctor in clinical practice. And I think it was that practice that led you first to suspect that there might be a new variant. Just perhaps summarise very briefly how you came to that thought.
Thank you so much. I always say I'm an old GP, 33 years in private practice. And still old school, do not go on the social media or the Zoom platform or Health ID. I normally see my patients physically. 600 plus patients with Delta that I have treated personally myself. And then we had this break from Delta, and about 8 weeks later, patients come back in with complaints that didn't make any sense. At all, young patient early in the morning doesn't fit, and tested. He was positive. Incidentally, his whole family made an appointment. That's also something unusual in our system. And the rest of the family was positive. And that day I saw this mild picture, and the picture predominantly for the past 4 weeks stays exactly the same. The 3 major complaints will be what myalgia, what we will call sore muscles or body ache and pain, headache, as well as there can be a bit of a fatigue for a day or two. Normally the patients will come because we run a campaign where we ask people, please get tested, even if you wake up with a slight headache, not feeling well, please come and let us double check. Consequently, we have noticed that if you wake up this morning and you have this headache and the myalgia, it would be prudent just to wait 24 hours especially for the rapid test. We have seen the rapid test can be still false negative in that first period, less than 24 hours. But after 24 hours, up until about 5 to 6 days later, the rapid test are more than sufficient, to be able to detect positive cases. We do, however, have patients that wait up until a week, then come in and says they're not sure, they just need to double check. They had this headache, not feeling well. Can we just double check? And then we will do a PCR, and normally that will be positive. So the symptoms are very similar for most of the patients. However, as well, unvaccinated patients seems to experience the severity of the myalgia as well as the headache more intense than our vaccinated patients. And yes, we do see nearly the same amount of patients who have been vaccinated versus unvaccinated with mild disease. although, as I've said, it seems that the vaccinated people even recover quicker than your unvaccinated people.
Thank you very much indeed. Finally from me, before I turn to my colleagues, starting with Erin Bell, given the experience of the last few weeks in South Africa, have any new restrictions, let's say non-pharmaceutical interventions, been taken by the South African government in response to Omicron?
No, we are still on the same level where there are restrictions at curfews at night and in early mornings, and then the gathering of people in outdoors and indoors, and nothing changed there. So we will wait this weekend to see whether our president, who incidentally also have contracted COVID, and we're quite sure it's Omicron, whether he would bring in any stricter restrictions. For now, it's already spread to all the other provinces, so interprovincial travel is not really going to do anything. And then again, from the South African Medical Association side, if there's anything that we would advise the president to do, would be maybe extend the curfew with it just 1 hour at night and in the morning, and look at the social gatherings. I've been asked this question a lot of times. What will the government do? What are they going to do against restrictions? And my question is the same the whole time. The government can provide you with vaccines. They can tell you to get vaccinated. The government can give, they can bring in certain regulations. But what are you as a responsible citizen going to do? You as a responsible citizen needs to adhere to these regulations and the non-pharmaceutical interventions. And you as a responsible citizen actually need to go and get your vaccines, because we have seen that the vaccines, it really seems at this stage that it still, although there's a escape of the vaccines, still protect you against severe disease. And we see that in our hospital cases that is lying in ICU.
Thank you. You're chair of the South African Medical Association. Does that view as to what should be done, is that, would you say, a view widely shared by the association, or is there a kind of hot debate about this?
So this is, I normally consult with my board regarding this, and then also if you look at what is happening at ground level, and if the cases are predominantly mild, and we don't have a problem in the family practitioner space as well as in the hospitals, then we don't see the need for stricter restrictions. There's an economic downfall to it as well. And again, people as already, as I've said, there's no use putting any restrictions around movement, because the virus is everywhere. And maybe in a way we need to learn how to live with this. And if this becomes sort of endemic going forward, we need to get as much people, if they are infected, the boost of their antibodies, as well as getting the boosters themselves to be able to help and assist here.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll turn to my colleague Erin Bell and then take some more colleagues.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Coetzee, for coming on today. And thank you also for your willingness to engage with the UK media, because it's been quite helpful for us to hear your experiences from South Africa here. On that note, you've written in the Daily Mail today, you've said that you've been astonished by the extraordinary worldwide reaction. You've said, with respect to Britain, that the reaction is out of all proportion to the risks posed by this variant, and you've said it verges on hysteria. Could you explain why you believe that, given that the countries in Europe have a very different population structure, a different exposure, we haven't had a beta wave and so on? Isn't it the case that countries in Europe are just taking a precautionary approach for a few weeks until we know more?
Yes. If you look at the current picture in the primary healthcare space in South Africa is that of mild disease. We said right from the beginning, we don't have all the answers. We still need to see how this virus progresses, what would be the clinical pictures, and in less than 24 hours, we were slammed from the UK with international travel bans. while we were trying to say, please guys, there's a new variant out there. And at that stage, we already at family practitioners level had a 1 week, 7 days experience when this happened. And we were still figuring it out as well. But already during that time, saw that the symptoms are definitely not the same than Delta. And, you know, to bring out a international travel ban in less than 24 hours after some announcement that's done, we do now understand that governments wants to protect their population and their people. But, you know, before you start doing these type of knee-jerk reactions, let's first get people to start wearing their masks, look at social distancing, look at your gatherings of people, and just try to start with the non-pharmaceutical interventions. And then simultaneously identify your people who are at high risk. If they need second or boosters, get them to do the boosters. Or if they have not been vaccinated, just get them to vaccinate. I think that's much better protection, especially seeing in the light of this variant that is mild. So what will happen is you will test me today remember what I've said with the especially the rapid test. I will come in, I won't feel that sick. You will test me, I will be negative. And only tomorrow will I be positive. So if I travel and I've done my test, and I've done it early, before I really have any real symptoms, I would test negative. And by the time I end up in another country, I might be testing positive.
Yes.
And with a virus that's such transmissible, you will in any case spread it. So, you know, it's difficult to stop it.
Yeah, I think given that community transmission is now widespread, I think the case for travel bans is probably changed. But if I could go back to what you said in the article again today, you said it's completely over the top to be talking about Plan Cs or lockdowns. What we're voting on today in the House of Commons isn't Plan C or a lockdown. It's essentially extending the requirement to wear masks, which you just mentioned, and also this COVID pass, some people calling it a vaccine passport, but also negative tests will allow you to get into larger events. Do you think that's a proportionate reaction in the UK?
Just at the crucial point, Dr. Coetzee is frozen there. I don't know whether she seems to be back. Dr. Coetzee, did you hear the question from my colleague Aaron Bell?
The last part I didn't.
Let me ask,
and then I didn't hear.
Let me ask Aaron to ask it again in summary form.
I'll go from the start. Thank you, Chair. And sorry, we just lost you for a moment, Dr. Coetzee. You said in the article you wrote today that it's completely over the top to be talking about Plan Cs or lockdowns. But what we're voting on today in the House of Commons is not a lockdown or even Plan C. It's an extension of the mask mandate, which you've already mentioned. And there's this COVID pass, some people calling it a vaccine passport, but either vaccination or a negative lateral flow test or a recent recovery from COVID will enable you to get into larger venues. Do you think that's a proportionate reaction to the threat of Omicron in the UK?
So what is important to do is first get your people to be vaccinated as much as, you know, and as I've said with the boosters, that's necessary. Get the people to wear their masks. Get the people to stay away from big gatherings. That should be the biggest plan at this stage to have in place, and not to, you know, come in and you know, the restrictions first, you know, close all the borders, close shops and all of that. So, you know, first look at what is going to happen with your age population. You might have a different population at South Africa, but also remember, even in South Africa, we have people not vaccinated, young people, most of them not vaccinated, with severe diseases like HIV and TB. We've got a huge burden of that. And we also know that a lot of these people also didn't get their treatment. They didn't adhere, especially during this past year with treatment. So rather get people treated with their comorbidities, make sure that they follow the protocols, get your non-pharmaceutical interventions, and then you start looking, how much are your systems or your healthcare system being overburdened by people. Always remember, you will have the worried well as well. But for us, the most important place to look at is what happens in the hospital level, because there's what the problem where the problem will, if anything will happen, it will happen at tertiary hospitals. And there you need to plan, you need to make sure that everything is in place there. People that were supposed to go on leave maybe be on standby. That would help much more than bringing in just blanket restrictions going forward.
Thank you. Could I just ask you about severity? You said it presents much milder. There's some data out this morning from the South African Medical Research Council together with Discovery, which is a South African insurance company, suggesting that severity is 29% lower than the original D614G wave. Is that a figure that makes sense to you, that it's milder than the original first wave by about 29%?
I think we may have temporarily lost Dr. Coetzee again. Let's see if we can get her back. Yes. Did you hear the question,
yes.
Dr. Coetzee? Yep.
Yes. Yes.
So
yes, it makes sense to us.
About 29% milder, right. And then also that same data, but the data that's been published said that a double dose of Pfizer, so not the booster, which most of our elderly have been boosted in the UK, but a double dose of Pfizer, instead of 80% protection against infection, you're down to 33%, and instead of 93% protection against severe disease, you're down to 70%. Are those numbers that make sense based on the South African experience as you've seen it?
Oh, we now seem to have lost Dr. Coetzee altogether. She's back. Let's just have one more try at that. Did you hear the question, Dr. Coetzee?
Can I shut on my video camera?
Yes, see if it's better audio. Yes, please do that.
Bandwidth?
Absolutely.
Did you hear the question, Dr. Coetzee?
Thank you. I think this is much better.
Yes, we can hear you.
Just repeat it quickly.
Sorry, just finally, the same data that was published this morning had information about the effectiveness of a double dose of Pfizer, but not with a booster, which most of our elderly have had. The two figures I wanted to put to you were the reduction in effectiveness against infection, 80% from Delta down to only 33% against Omicron, and for hospital admissions down from 93% effectiveness against Delta, only 70% with Omicron. Are those numbers that you recognise from your experience in South Africa?
So what we have seen, if I look at my own stats of the patient, I had seen personally 88 patients. So the vaccinated patients, 39 versus unvaccinated patients, 43. So yes, we know that the patients get breakthrough infections, whether you're vaccinated or you get reinfected as well, or patients who had been reinfected before or had been infected before and fully vaccinated. They can still get breakthrough infections. However, the breakthrough infections that we are seeing at primary healthcare level are mild, those of mildness. And again, the symptoms experienced by these people or patients are less severe or intense than the unvaccinated. On the hospital level, where patients are admitted, as I've said before, the majority, between 88 to 90% are unvaccinated. So the question would be, and that is why it's so important for us to understand the vaccinated group in the hospitals, whether they do have, had they had Omicron or Delta before, so that we can determine how well the vaccines are protecting you against these two variants. But we don't have that data.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much indeed, Darren. We'll try Dawn Butler. We're reaching the limits of the bandwidth here, but Dawn, perhaps some short questions that might get through.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Coetzee. How many weeks has it been since you discovered Omicron variant?
On Thursday, it would be 4 weeks.
4 weeks, brilliant. And can you just tell us, please, what's the population in South Africa that have been vaccinated?
It would be 4 weeks. 2 days from now.
Brilliant, thank you. And what is the population that have been vaccinated, the percentage, please, and the percentage of the population that have had a booster jab in South Africa?
So the percentage in South Africa that has been vaccinated is around about 23%. The boosters, we haven't started with the boosters for Pfizer yet. We will start with that, and with Johnson & Johnson, we started last month with the boosters, and quite a few of those doctors and healthcare workers has been vaccinated. So the fully vaccinated under the Sesonke trial, Sesonke 2, that's the healthcare workers, is around about 200,000 that already has been vaccinated with their second or with their booster on Sesonke, on Johnson & Johnson. And fully vaccinated in South Africa, we had under the age groups that we have been allocated is 38%, and that have been vaccinated. So there's still a lot of people, as I have said. In the total, 23% of our population has been vaccinated.
Right. Thank you very much. I know that South Africa's quite advanced in genome sequencing. It has been said that the variant was in Europe before you discovered it in South Africa. Is that correct?
Can't comment on that. I didn't saw the stats, and it could have been anywhere. I think if you take UK as an example, you have seen so many Delta cases that you can easily miss this light picture at primary healthcare level, and it could be in any other country. So I don't think there's anyone that can claim that it was first started in their country. I don't think so.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question, if it was correct to say that it started in South Africa. And my last question, please, and thank you very much for your time today. Do you do any antibody testing or T-cell testing in South Africa?
We don't do it routinely. That is done at scientist level and not routinely. And the T-cell antibodies, I know it's quite a difficult field, and it's an expensive field. So this is one of the things I think what one needs to look going forward is to make sure that there are more investment in science as to improve the healthcare, and especially in studies around T-cell immunity, as well as your normal antibodies. Unfortunately, with what we have seen with the COVID, is that your antibodies, instead of taking 6 months to get your IgG positive, it can get positive within 2 to 3 weeks. So it's very difficult. And then the antibody test is not really going to tell you how good your T-cell immunity are. So I think there's a need for this field, and I think there's a need for science to be reimbursed and for trials to be conducted here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Coetzee. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Dawn. Just a final question from me. Perhaps I could just follow up an answer, Dr. Coetzee, you gave to my colleague Aaron Bell. He was asking you about lockdown restrictions, non-pharmaceutical interventions, as they're called. Am I recalling what you said correctly, which you said that you'd be against restrictions that might be a lockdown, but that people should avoid crowded places? Have I captured that correctly?
Yes, you captured it correctly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so one of the proposals before the House of Commons today is that in larger venues, people should either have to demonstrate a negative lateral flow test or to show that they've been double vaccinated. What's your assessment of those proposed measures?
Well, it can help and it can assist a lot. Unfortunately, I'm coming from South Africa, where we know how easy it is to counterfeit anything. And so as long as you have checks and balances and checks in place to make sure that its original passports or mandates being shown at wherever you acquire them, that might work. But again, there's always people that would look on how they can fool the system. So you have to have a foolproof system there.
Thank you very much indeed. We're very grateful to you for joining us from South Africa this morning and persevering despite the technical difficulties. We managed to get your answers to all of our questions. So thank you very much indeed for joining us and helping us in this important session this morning. I'm now going to invite our next witness to give evidence to the committee. And I'm pleased to welcome Professor Wei-Shen Lim. Professor Lim is the chair of the COVID-19 panel of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. Professor Lim, thank you very much indeed. And again, you've helped the committee several times with our inquiry, and we're very grateful for your appearance today. Perhaps I can start off with a question about timings. Boosters were authorised by the JCVI, or at least JCVI gave a recommendation that they should be authorised for all adults, and I think on the 29th of November. What stopped that recommended authorisation being earlier?
Thanks very much. I hope you can hear me all right.
We can. And see
Thank
you.
Could I just make a slight maybe correction? So boosters were advised by JCVI for people aged 50 years and above on the 14th of September.
Indeed.
And for people 60 to 49 years old who are in a clinical risk group, also on the 14th of September. And then boosters were advised for people aged 40 to 49-year-olds on the 15th of November.
Yes. So my question was that I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, the case that for all adults it was the 29th of November. Is that correct?
Well, so for adults under 40, that came in on the 29th of November.
Indeed. So that's my question. Could that recommendation have come earlier?
It could, but I don't think it would have been appropriate to come earlier. We set out on the 29th of November a set of advice as immediate response measures to Omicron. Omicron was identified by a lab in South Africa on the 23rd of November. It was declared as a variant of concern by WHO on the 26th of November. JCVI met as a committee on the 27th of November in the evening, that was a Saturday. And on the 29th of November, 3 days after WHO declared it as a variant of concern, we advised a set of immediate response measures, one of which was to accelerate the booster campaign across the board. So the acceleration of the booster campaign came 3 days after this was recognized by WHO as a variant of concern. We could have potentially called it earlier, 2 days earlier, but I don't think we could have called it before Omicron was identified.
I see. So I guess the heart of the question is, obviously, as you described, you responded very quickly once we knew that Omicron was circulating, starting in South Africa. But the decision to give boosters to over 50s, as you said, happened on the 14th of September, before anyone had ever heard of Omicron, probably before it was even in existence. So there was I assume in your minds, a set of anticipation of preempting during the winter a variant or a susceptibility to infection by people that had been vaccinated twice. So the question is, would it have been better, now looking back, to have, as a precaution, used the autumn to vaccinate with a booster the whole population rather than waiting for evidence of a dangerous new strain?
The simple answer is no. So the decision in September to offer vaccination to people over 50, for example, was based on the Delta variant, which is circulating, and the amount of waning of protection against severe disease. The data from the UK Health Security Agency showed that there was starting to be some waning against severe disease, this is hospitalization and people sadly dying, from about 6 months onwards, particularly in the older people. The data for waning against severe disease for younger people who are otherwise well, so not in a clinical risk group, remains very good against Delta up to 6 months. So they have over 90% protection against severe disease, even 6 months from their second dose. Therefore, insofar as protection against Delta is necessary, we only need to boost people whose protection are waning. And we identified those in September. Your question about hindsight or foresight is different from foreknowledge. Foresight is trying to identify something that will transpire given a set of circumstances. Foreknowledge is prophetic knowledge of something that didn't exist that will then exist. The booster campaign for Omicron is a response to the threat of Omicron, and that needs a different way of thinking.
A very important distinction. And so thinking of foresight and foreknowledge, what would have been the downside of vaccinating during the autumn the whole adult population in anticipation of the possibility that there might be presenting itself during the winter something worrying like Omicron? What would have been the downside of doing it in anticipation?
As you know, the protection does wane, and we've seen that with the older population. So at any points that we give a vaccine or a booster, we will see an improvement in the level of protection, but potentially we then see that level of protection dip over time. And therefore, one doesn't want to give boosters unnecessarily too early, because if you already have good protection at one point in time, there's no point giving extra protection at that time. It's better to wait for the appropriate time so that you extend your durability. As I explained in September when we launched the booster program, we were not thinking only about this winter, we're thinking also about next winter. So putting aside Omicron and just thinking about Delta, if somebody only needs to have a booster at 6 months, then giving the booster at 6 months might mean that their protection then lasts for much longer. If the booster were given at 3 months, for instance, one, it will wane earlier, and secondly, a shorter time to boost might mean a lower peak protection, which also has an effect on durability. So it's not necessarily true that giving a booster sooner is better. If anything, all things being equal, giving a booster as far apart as possible gives the best immune response. And so one would want to choose a furthest time point, if one can, depending on the amount of waning.
Thank you. That's very clear. And just finally on this, suppose one did, as a precaution, give a booster earlier than might have been optimal. Would there be any problem with then supplementing that with a fourth dose in the spring if that had waned by consequence in the spring rather than in the summer?
I think we're looking not just at one vaccine, we're looking across the board at the effort to give a vaccine. As you heard from Dame Kate earlier on, the cost of deploying a vaccine in the vaccine program is extremely high, almost as high as procuring the vaccine. And deploying millions of doses of vaccine has a cost on services, on GP's time, and many other things, much not least on the public effort. So I don't think it's if you will, a free ride to give a vaccine once and give it again very quickly thereafter. All of these need to be considered in terms of their wider effects as well.
Would you accept that the costs of vaccines and administering them, while significant, pale into insignificance against the cost of the incidence of waves of infection and perhaps hospitalization that they might prevent?
That's only if you know that something like Omicron was occurring. So you could take the precautionary principle and say, I am not going to chart or look at the amount of waning. I'm simply going to give a vaccine in 3 months because there might be a variant occurring at 4 months' time. And after 3 months, I might again give another vaccine boost at a further 3 months because a variant hasn't appeared, but there might be a variant coming in the next 4 months. And that could go on the whole year, giving a booster every 3 months because you don't know whether a variant is going to occur 4 months later. I can't see that is a sustainable program for the country going into just 1 year, much less a few years.
Although if the alternative is 3 monthly impositions of restrictions, that also has its downsides, I think you'd accept as well.
I would, but as I said, you only impose or consider imposing the restrictions if there is a variant. Whereas what you're suggesting is that you might want to give boosters every 3 months just in case, not knowing if you ever need boosters every 3 months at all. So this is on the off chance of a variant occurring or emerging that would require widespread social restrictions. And we haven't reached that point yet either.
Indeed. Well, we'll go further into detail, and I'm very grateful for the clarity of your answers on this. I'll go to Carol Monaghan, then Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Chair. Professor Lim, you've talked about giving boosters every 3 months, and I maybe understood you wrongly, so you can correct me if this is the case. Did you say that if we start giving boosters more frequently, there will be a quicker waning of antibodies? So we would require to give boosters more frequently?
No, I didn't say that at all. The principle is that if you have a bigger gap between 2 doses, you're likely to get a higher immune response. And you might remember back in December last year, the UK decided to extend the interval between dose 1 and dose 2 to 12 weeks rather than 3 to 4 weeks. In that year, we now have data to show that by extending the interval between the 2 doses, one gets a stronger, i.e. a higher immune response. The level of waning is affected by the peak immune response. So if the level that is attained after the second dose is higher, one hopes that therefore the duration of protection is longer. Similarly, for a booster dose, if a 6-month booster gives a higher level of protection than a 3-month boost, then when you start to wane from a higher level, it takes longer to wane. The second way of extending the protection is simply that if you give a booster at 6 months rather than 3 months, then you've already gained 3 months. And so you extend your total level of protection. I hope that makes sense.
It does make sense, but you're saying that if you give the booster too soon, it will wane more quickly.
So that is indeed might be the case. So if you give the booster at 6 months and you reach a higher level, so let's give a number, say you reach a level of 200, and that wanes at a certain constant rate, then to drop from 200 to 50 will take a certain period of time. If you give the booster at 3 months and the peak level it can get to is lower, say 150, and it wanes at the same rate, you will reach 50 at an earlier time point.
So that would then necessitate more regular boosters.
Indeed, and that's why generally, if possible, we try and push out the duration between 2 doses.
Okay, so now the JCVI is offering a booster to everyone over the age of 18, and this interval has been shortened now to 3 months. So what evidence was that based upon?
Yeah, so the current booster campaign and the interval is not based on waning, it's because of the threat of Omicron. And the principle here is that if you give a booster, you get a high immune response. And we think that a high immune response is what is needed to bridge the gap of the mismatch between the new variant, Omicron, and the vaccine strain, which was based on the wild type or Wuhan variant. So you need a higher level, hence the booster. The second principle for the booster campaign for Omicron is that you want to give the booster before the wave comes. There is less benefit in giving a booster in the middle of a wave or after a wave. So we want to bring the booster dose earlier if we think the wave is going to come earlier. When we looked at this as soon as Omicron was declared, we felt that there was a high chance that the Omicron wave will come soon. And therefore, we want to bring forward the booster dose so that it occurs before the wave.
Okay,
we chose 3
which
months
seems...
because we have data from a trial to show that at 3 months from the second dose, the boost still gives a very high immune response.
Okay, so this was a precautionary, this is a precautionary booster then in order to preempt this wave? And
yes, that's right.
And so for example, I had my booster on Friday. When should I need another booster?
We don't know that. If you had your booster on Friday, which is excellent, it will take about a week for you to have the full benefit from that booster dose. That's how we estimate the peak protection from the boost. But it's too soon now to advise when the next booster needs to be given.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lim. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Jeremy Hunt and then Catherine Fletcher.
Thank you, Professor Lim. I mean, you were acclaimed, JCVI and the MHRA were acclaimed around the world for being the most nimble regulators anywhere when a year and a week ago exactly, we gave the first clinically approved vaccine to any patient anywhere in the world. And you didn't have foreknowledge, for example, of all the possible side effects, of which there turned out to be 1 or 2, but you made a balanced judgment that it was right to proceed. Israel made that same balanced judgment that it was right to proceed with booster jabs for all adults in September. Now, you've made that judgment now. With the benefit of hindsight, Israel was right, weren't they, and we were wrong? No,
I'm sorry, I would disagree. as you would expect me to. We judged that the most vulnerable people should be boosted. If you look at the booster campaign data from Israel, the protection that they obtained from the booster in terms of preventing hospitalization and people dying against Delta, which is what we were facing with then, was almost entirely in people above 40 years of age. So we went down to 40 years of age, and we had not excluded the possibility of boosting people under 40 years, but in September, there were not that many people under 40 years of age who were healthy, who were yet 6 months from their second dose anyway, and the data we had was that they have very good protection for 6 months, over 90% protection. So we were going in a useful and
I'm just struggling. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm just struggling. My wife is getting her booster this morning. She's under 50. Omicron transmission is 200,000 a day. And you're really saying that it would have made no difference if you had given the instruction to give the boosters to under 50s earlier, as they did in Israel. It seems to me, as a non-scientist, totally obvious that it would have been better if we'd had those instructions earlier, with the benefit of hindsight. That's all I'm asking.
I don't think you can predict that a variant like Omicron would have emerged.
Well, they did in Israel. They made a precautionary judgment. Let me ask another one. We have had for the whole autumn very high transmission rates in schools. And that's one of the reasons that our death rates have continued to be consistently around the 100 mark or above during the autumn. Now France made a balanced judgment to vaccinate teenagers in June. You refused to make that judgment even in September. In the end, we had to sort of do a workaround using the chief medical officers. Again, with the benefit of hindsight, didn't France get that balanced judgment right, and weren't we wrong?
I think with the benefit of extra data, then we would have moved earlier, but we didn't have the extra data on safety.
But they didn't have that data in France either. That's why. Okay, let me give you another one then. America's already made a decision that it's safe to vaccinate the over 5s with Pfizer. We haven't made a decision yet. Again, I suppose the question I'm really asking, having been the most nimble in the world and received plaudits everywhere for being fleet of foot, can you understand why people are worried that not just yourselves, but with the MHRA, our regulators have been dragging their feet and therefore putting the NHS at greater risk this winter than it might otherwise have been?
I've been asked that question before, and if you look at the different decisions that have been made, there is a time, I believe, to be extra fast, and there's a time to move extra cautiously. We've moved very quickly at the start when there was a need to. We moved very quickly when Alpha emerged and we needed to change the advice. And we've moved very quickly when Omicron emerged and we've changed our advice. So where we need to move very quickly, we will do so. Where we feel that we do not want to outpace the data for safety reasons, we feel we will do so. Both of these obviously are judgments as to how quickly one moves. We have made out those judgments based on the best available information.
Thank you. Catherine Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. Hiya, Professor Lim. Thanks very much for your time and brilliant answers as usual. I just want to go back to something that maybe people in the community are talking about more so than the kind of the science advice. So it's not unusual for me to have heard, oh, I had it back in June, I had it back in July, I was COVID positive, I don't need a booster for a while. Could you perhaps talk about the assessment that you're making of previous infection and how that plays into the need for boosters for a given individual? And then I might follow that up in a broader scale.
Thanks. That's a very good question because, as you say, it is being discussed by a lot of people. And if we look firstly at the laboratory data on antibodies, for example, what is found is that somebody who has had prior infection and then has one dose of vaccine, their immune response after the one dose is actually very, very good and almost similar to somebody having 2 doses of the vaccine. The same is also true for somebody who has had prior infection and then has 2 doses of the vaccine. Their immune response is similar to somebody who has had 3 doses of the vaccine. So what is happening with natural infection is that on recovery from natural infection, an immune response, protective immune response is generated. And that appears to act almost like a vaccine-generated immune response. It's called natural immunity compared to vaccine-induced immunity. So somebody who has been infected once, the data from the first wave and some of the second wave show that those people are protected from reinfection for a long period of time, just from natural immunity.
Could you enumerate that long period? Because in effect,
It's
what a natural
6 months.
infection is doing is giving a kind of, we've been talking in the previous session about Valneva as a whole attenuated vaccine producing a much stronger immune response. If you've actually had it and got over it, how long can you be confident that you are protected for?
The data suggests that protection is about 6 months at least. The studies don't go too far out beyond that for natural infection. But I just want to draw attention to the difference with Omicron. In general, if you just take people who've had previous infection and no vaccines whatsoever, if you measure their immune response, it is lower than somebody who's had 2 doses of vaccine. With Omicron, there is concern that there is a much lower protection from natural immunity alone, i.e. if somebody's had previous infection and not had any vaccines whatsoever, that whereas they would have been reasonably well protected for, say, alpha or wild-type vaccine in the past, they may not be quite so well protected when it comes to Omicron.
So if I made the following statement, having had it prior, Omicron is a game changer even if you feel you have immunity from prior infection, and it is still important that you take up the offer of a booster.
Exactly, yes, that is absolutely right. That's the current thinking.
Brilliant, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Just a couple of final questions. Just going back to our conversation earlier. You talked about the cost of a vaccine programme, both the vaccines themselves and the work incurred in vaccinating people. Does the JCVI consider cost, the cost effectiveness in making its decisions, or is it entirely in terms of clinical effectiveness?
At the moment, usually we would consider cost effectiveness, but we've not considered cost effectiveness because the vaccine procurement has been occurring on a different level.
So in terms of the decision, the timing of the decisions, was the cost of vaccination a factor that was considered in not proceeding with earlier vaccination, or was that entirely on clinical grounds?
You need to just maybe I can ask some clarification. When you say not proceeding, we've never made a decision not to proceed. We've been looking at when to offer vaccinations rather than when not to.
Well, what I mean is...
what are you referring to?
So, as you pointed out, on the 14th of September, there was a recommendation that over 50s and vulnerable groups get vaccinated, but not people under 50. So was the decision not to recommend that under 50s were vaccinated from the 14th of September, was that partly at least a consideration of the costs of so doing?
No, it's because over 50s were the group that we felt needed a booster at the time, and other people didn't need a booster at the time.
Indeed, so it was entirely on clinical grounds. Thank you. My final question was just going back to one of the points that my colleague Jeremy Hunt made about a decision that the US has taken to vaccinate now children from the age of 5. When might an assessment be made by the JCVI of the desirability of doing that in the UK?
We are discussing that at the moment. We're also waiting for the vaccines to be approved by MHRA.
Right. So would you expect to make a decision before Christmas on that?
I would expect so. We try and keep in step with the approval process.
Right. And do you have any insight as to when the MHRA might make that assessment?
I don't think I should be trying to double guess when they might do that.
That is you say you're considering it, so that is the next decision, and it's a live decision. It's you're contemplating it now. Okay, thank you very much.
Indeed, yes.
I think
right.
Dawn Butler had a question that she wanted to come in on.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick question, Dr. Lim. We need to prepare for future pandemics. How can we best do that?
Well, that's a very broad question. There are all sorts of ways where we need to do that and how we need to do that. It ranges from surveillance mechanisms to science to public education. Was there a specific area that you were thinking about?
I was thinking about how we manufacture vaccines and ensuring that we have control of that rather than big pharmaceutical companies, number one, so that we'll be able to not just vaccinate people but share the vaccine, so it's not on profit but on keeping people well. And the second thing in relation to where we are now in regards to this current pandemic is the boosting up of the testing of antibodies and T cells.
I am not probably the right person to talk about vaccine manufacturing. As a general principle, if you have control over manufacturing, that's always better. But as Dame Kate has mentioned, it may be better if that's based in the UK. Again, that's outside my area of expertise, so I'm not going to discuss where manufacturing should occur. In terms of the testing of immunological responses, yes, absolutely. The better we are at doing that, the better the science. And it's not just vaccines or immunology, it's also other therapeutics and interventions. All of this is going to be important as we move forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Lim.
Thank you very much indeed. Professor Lim, thank you very much indeed for your evidence today. These are very important and I'm sure in some cases difficult decisions, and what we want to do is to understand some of the thinking behind it, and you've been very clear and very candid about that, and we're very grateful for your evidence today, but also for your work chairing the panel. So thank you.